What you are about to see defies any brief verbal description.
I never said there were 30 people. I said 24.
The 8th, obviously 1973, Dean Corll was shot and killed by Elmer Wayne Henley at his house in Pasadena.
To begin with, he wanted to kill me.
Brooks and Corll, they're generally credited with at least 28 murders. Their nickname that they're given still to this day is the Houston Mass Murders. The word serial killer wasn't even coined. It didn't even exist.
Dean Arnold Corll, a serial killer, who was responsible for committing no less than 28 murders, with the help from his two teenage accomplices, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, between 1970 and 1973. These killings would later come to be known as the Houston Mass Murders, considered the worst in the United States. Join me as we explore the life and crimes of Dean Corll. Welcome to Simply Told. Dean was born on the 24th of December 1939, in Indiana. The firstborn to Mary Emma Robertson and Arnold Edwin Corll. Both Mary and Arnold had different parenting styles. Arnold was the strict disciplinarian, and Mary was protective. Inevitably, the marriage fails in 1946. After the divorce, Dean lived with his mom in a trailer park in Memphis, to be close to their dad, Arnold, who was drafted into the Air Force. Dean was known to be a shy introvert, concerned for the well-being of others. He wasn't allowed to partake in any strenuous activity, which includes sport or physical education, due to a heart murmur doctors discovered when Dean was still young. In 1950, after making up, Dean's parents decides to give it another go, and gets married. By 1953, they got divorced. They separate on amicable terms, giving Arnold freedom to see his kids. Dean's mom bounces back from her failed marriage, tying the knot with a clock salesman, Jake West. Moving to Vidor, a small town in Texas. After giving birth to his stepsister, Joyce West, Dean's mother and stepfather decides to start a business from of their garage, manufacturing candy. Dean was partially responsible for running the machines, and packing of the finished product, for Dean's stepdad, to sell on his sales route. Dean attends Vidor High School between 1954 to 1958. He was considered to be an average, and polite student, who played the trombone in the school brass band. Even though he had no issues chatting up girls to go on dates with him, he never really interacted much. After graduating high school in 1958, Dean's family packs up, and moves them and their business closer to the city, where most of their revenue was made. 1960. Dean was sent to live with his widowed grandmother in Indiana. Few years later, in 1962, Dean returns home to help the family out with the business. The family had opened up a shop by that time. But things fall apart for Mary and Jake, leading to their divorce in 1963. Mary opens her own candy manufacturing business, named Corll Candy Company, and appoints Dean as vice president, making Stanley, Dean's younger brother, secretary-treasurer. Later that same year, an employee lays a complaint against Dean, claiming Dean had made sexual advances towards him. Mary reacts quickly, and fires the employee. The 10th of August 1964, 24-year-old Dean was drafted into the Army, and assigned for basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana. By the 11th of June 1969, Dean was honorably discharged from the Army after serving 10 months. Dean later states that the army was where he realized he was homosexual. Dean kills his first victim on the 25th of September 1970. He was an 18-year-old college freshman named Jeffrey Connon. Jeffrey went missing while hitchhiking his way home from university one day. It's believed he was dropped off on the corner of Westheimer Road, near Dean's apartment. He accidentally bumps into Dean, and is subsequently offered a ride home. On the 10th of August 1973, David leads the police to Jeffrey's burial at High Island Beach. He was found buried underneath a boulder, covered with lime and wrapped in plastic. How David got a green Corvette. Well, one day, about the time Jeffrey went missing, David walks into Dean's home, interrupting him. Dean had two teenage boys strapped to his bed, while he was, let's say, having his way with them. He promises to buy David a car for his silence. And he later keeps that promise, pulling up in a green Corvette. Now that David was aware of Dean's dark side, he offers David $200 for every kid that he lures to his apartment. On the 13th of December 1970, David invites two 14-year-old youths named James Glass and Danny Yates, whom he lured away from a religious gathering held in the Heights. James and David knew one another, and it wasn't his first time at Dean's place. They were both tied up to a torture board and raped. After tiring himself on the two boys, he strangles them, before burying them at a boat shed he was renting at the time. On the 30th of January 1971, Dean and David meets brothers Donald and Jerry Waldrop, while they walked home from a friend's place after finding out that he wasn't home. The brothers somehow lands up in Dean's van, and was driven to Dean's Mangum Road apartment. There, they were subsequently raped and strangled, before burying them at the boat shed. On the 17th of August 1971, David sees a guy he knows, a 17-year-old Reuben Watson Haney, who was walking home from the movies at the time. David invites him to hang out with him at a party, located at Dean's new apartment on San Felipe Street. He was later strangled and buried at the boat shed. During September 1971, Dean moves to his new apartment situated in the Heights. While at that location, David claimed to have assisted Dean lure and murder two unknown youths, keeping them alive for days, before killing them. On the 9th of March, 15-year-old Randall Harvey was last seen cycling to work, where he worked part-time as a gas station attendant. He was killed at Dean's apartment with a single gunshot to the head, and buried at the boat shed. 13-year-old David Hilligiest, and 16-year-old Gregory Malleywinkle was Dean's next victims. They were abducted and killed on the 29th of May 1971. And buried at the boat shed. Parents of the missing boys staged a massive search for them. One of the youths from the neighborhood who volunteered handing out flyers was 15-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley. During the winter of 1971, David introduces Elmer to Dean. And like with David, Dean offers Elmer the same deal of $200 for every boy he brings to the apartment, explaining to Elmer that he was involved in a white slavery ring, operating out of Dallas. According to Elmer, at first he rejects Dean's offer. But over time he begins to open up and confide in Dean. With that their friendship grew. In 1972, due to his family's financial situation at that time, Elmer agrees to Dean's offer. They lured their unknown victim to come hang out at Dean's place to smoke some weed. Elmer shows the boy a trick. He cuffs his own hands behind his back, but freed himself afterwards. He hands the boy the cuffs and gets him to try the trick himself. What the boy doesn't know is that Elmer had the hand cuff keys in his back pocket. The moment the boy cuffs himself, Dean grabs him, gags him, then ties him up. Believing the slavery ring story Dean gave him, Elmer just ups and leaves, leaving the boy with Dean. On the 24th of March 1972, Elmer, David and Dean were out on the prowl, when Elmer sees a guy he knows, Frank Aguirre, as he exits a restaurant. They casually invite him to join them at Dean's place for some weed and beer. Frank agrees and follows them in his car. Once there, Dean handcuffs Frank and has his sadistic way with him. Elmer insists that he had no knowledge of Dean's true intentions with Frank, saying that he pleaded with Dean not to do this to him. But Dean refuses, stating that he killed the boys from before, and he plans to do the same with Frank. Even now that Elmer knew what Dean was really up to, he continues helping Dean. In the end, Elmer assists in Frank's burial. About a month later, David and Elmer was out with Dean, scouting for his next playmate. They spot a familiar face, their friend, Mark Scott. He was grabbed and he was quickly overpowered. Mark puts up a fight but eventually gives up the moment he notices Elmer pointing a gun at him. Mark ends up like the rest. Raped, strangled, then buried. On the 26th of June, they abduct Johnny Dellum and Billy Bulge. They both suffered the same fate. But according to David, with these boys it seemed as if Elmer was actually getting into it, becoming more sadistic, actively participating in the murders. He strangled Billy and shoots Johnny in the head, with the bullet exiting the boy's ear. They were both buried at High Island Beach. After vacating the Schuler Street residence, Dean moves into a place in Westgate Towers in 1972. There he kills a further 2 more boys. 17-year-old Stephen Sickman was last seen leaving a party on the 19th of July. He was buried in the boat shed. A month later, on the 21st of August, 19-year-old Roy Bunton was abducted while he was walking to work. He was bound and gagged, shot in the head, before burying him in the boat shed. The 2nd of October 1972, David and Elmer spots 2 teens named Wally J. Simoneau and Richard Hembry. They were both invited to hang out at Dean's place. The 2 boys were eventually strangled to death, and buried in the boat shed. Sometime the following month, an 18-year-old Willard Branch went missing while hitchhiking his way to Houston. He was later found buried at the boat shed. On the 15th of November 19-year-old Richard Kepner disappears while walking to a pay phone. He was strangled and buried at High Island Beach. On the 20th of January 1973, Dean moves to a new place on Wirt Road in Houston. And barely 2 weeks at his new address, Dean kills 17-year-old Joseph Lyles. On the 7th of March, Dean moves once again, and into a place on Lamar Drive, Pasadena. On the 4th of June, Elmer and Dean kidnaps 15-year-old William Ray Lawrence. He was tortured for 3 days before he was finally strangled to death and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. Then barely 2 weeks later, 20-year-old Raymond Stanley Blackburn was abducted, strangled, and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. On the 6th of July 1973, Elmer meets 15-year-old Homer Luis Garcia, while he was attending classes at a driving school in Bel Air. He was shot, and left to bleed out in Dean's bathtub, and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. Then, On the 12th of July, 17-year-old John Sellers was shot and buried at High Island Beach. The next victim was 15-year-old Michael Balch. Coincidentally the brother of Dean's earlier victims, Billy Balch. Last seen on the 19th of July while on his way to the barber shop. He was strangled and buried at Lake Sam Rayburn. Then there's Charles Cobble and Marty Ray Jones. They were abducted on the 25th of July. They were buried at the boat shed. And then finally, on the 3rd of August 1973, Dean kills 13-year-old James Stanton Dremala. James was abducted by the duo while riding his bike. He was tortured, raped, then strangled to death, before he was buried at the boat shed. On the evening of the 7th of August 1973, Elmer invites his 19-year-old friend, Timothy Cordell Curley, to attend a party at Dean's place. The two boys hangs out for a while before disappearing. Later returning, at around 3 a.m. the following morning. Elmer and Timothy enters Dean's place followed with their friend, Rhonda Williams. Dean was clearly upset that Elmer brought a girl to his place, saying he ruined everything. Elmer explains that Rhonda had a fight with her dad and wasn't eager to return home. Dean eventually calms down, and even offers them beer and weed. After a 2-hour session, the three of them eventually pass out. Elmer eventually wakes up and finds himself lying down, handcuffed, ankles tied, and with his mouth taped shut. Rhonda and Timothy lay beside him. They were also bound and gagged, while laying face down. Except Timothy was stripped naked. Dean sees Elmer waking up and removes his gag. Explaining his actions was due to Elmer bringing a girl into his place. Saying, "Man, you blew it bringing that girl," before shouting, "I'm gonna kill you all. But first I'm gonna have my fun." He drags Elmer into the kitchen, and grabs his gun, shoving it into Elmer's stomach, threatening to pull the trigger. Elmer was set free, after agreeing to participate in Rhonda's and Timothy's ultimate death. Dean then ties the two friends to opposite sides of his torture board, placing Timothy on his stomach, with Rhonda positioned on her back. Elmer was handed a hunting knife and ordered to cut away on Rhonda's clothing. She asks Elmer, "Is this for real?" Elmer replies with, "Yes." She then asks, "Are you going to do anything about it?" Elmer grabs Dean's gun, and screams out, "You've gone far enough, Dean. I can't go on any longer. I can't have you kill all my friends." Dean climbs of Timothy and approaches Elmer, saying, "Kill me, Wayne. You won't do it." Elmer grips the gun tighter, as he pulls the trigger, hitting Dean on the forehead. But the bullet fails to penetrate. Dean then leaps to grab Elmer, but Elmer fires off an additional 2 rounds, hitting Dean in the shoulder. Dean then runs out of the room and slams against the wall in the hallway. Elmer shoots 3 more times, hitting Dean in the back and shoulder. Dean eventually slides down the wall, and falls to the floor, where he dies. Elmer Wayne Henley and David Owen Brooks were each tried separately. On the 1st of July 1974, Elmer was charged with 6 counts of murder. Many witnesses were called to testify, including Dean's surviving victims. Parents of the murdered victims had to periodically leave the courtroom to regain their composure, after hearing the gruesome details depicting the final moments their loved ones had to endure. After deliberating for around 90 minutes, the jury returns, finding Elmer Wayne Henley guilty for 6 murder charges. On the 8th of August, Elmer Wayne Henley was sentenced to serve a total of 594 years behind bars, equaling 99 years for each murder. Elmer appealed his sentence, and in December 1978, he was awarded a retrial. His retrial was held on the 18th of June 1979, lasting no more than 9 days. On the 27th of June 1979, after deliberating for 2 hours, the jury returns with a verdict. Elmer Wayne Henley was once again found guilty for 6 murders, equaling 99 years behind bars for each murder, totaling 594 years. The same as before. David's trial was on the 27th of February 1975. He was originally charged with 4 murders, but by the time of his trial, it was reduced to 1 murder charge. On the 4th of March 1975, David Owen Brooks was found guilty of William Ray Lawrence's murder. He was sentenced to serve life behind bars. David also appeals his sentence. But in May 1979, David's appeal was dismissed. Elmer Wayne Henley is serving his sentence at the Mark Stiles Unit in Jefferson County, Texas. David Owen Brooks served his term at the Terrell Unit, Texas, but only until the 28th of May 2020, when he dies of COVID-19 related complications, at the age of 65.